It is now streaming. Deryck Poole. As I sit here and look at the screen, of course, with the potential technical difficulties, we were opening up with you on a black screen. So hopefully all the viewers are able to hear you as you're coming back. I can see you now, so hopefully everybody can hear you. But welcome to Training Talk for the June 2024 show. We're going to get into some fun topics tonight, some serious topics, talking about drop safe firearms, the importance of them. Does it mean what we think it means, and how does that play into training and ultimately personal defense? Deryck, man, welcome to the show. What's going on?
Thanks, man. Usual during training during the PDN tour season. I was just in Colorado a few weeks ago back doing instructor development on the tour with Edgar at Guns for Everyone in Colorado, and then Chris Gerke.
Awesome, awesome. Well, if y'all are watching and tuning in tonight, can you drop us a comment to let us know, as long as we are coming in clear, that you can hear us correctly? You know, I'm getting an actual error, I think, on the YouTube, so I want to make sure that it is going out live. It looked like it was not. Maybe that's what's happening here. But I think that we are now live on YouTube. So welcome everybody to the show on the YouTubes. But yeah, just let us know that you can hear us, that coming through, that the audio coming through, the visuals going through. Because as we've talked about in the past, unfortunately, when you do these live shows, there can be some last minute hiccups and errors and that kind of stuff. But I think that we are good to go now. So try to pay attention to comments and whatnot, with that. This is we're really kind of in the heat of the training tours. Deryck was just pointing out, there's classes that have been going all over from the West Coast to the East Coast. I think Rob, maybe a week or two ago, it seemed like he was out in Hawaii as well. There's been a big, really, I guess, a big push for training out there. After many, many years of not having gun rights, all of a sudden they have the right, but through the Bruin decision, to be able to carry guns for personal defense. And so through that, there's been a strong interest in training in Hawaii. So I know that he's been out there for the past couple of years to provide courses for that. But yeah, lots of classes going on, lots of instructors, everything from medical stuff to long range stuff to handguns and rifles to hands-on, all kind of stuff. So if you haven't taken a look at the website to see what classes are near you, be sure to do so at the pdntrainingtour.com website. As always, thanks for tuning in, and thank you for Primary Arms Online for sponsoring tonight's show. If you've probably been to their website, I know it seems that most in the gun community have, but if you haven't, why not take a look at it? They're always offering different coupons and discounts. So be sure to jump on their email list as well to be able to get the latest, greatest with their offerings. But if there's something you're interested in that has anything to do with this show, then they probably have that ultimately available for you. So be to the website if you have not. But again, to them for sponsoring tonight's show, which is going to be on Drop Safe with Guns. Deryck, yeah. Yes, I really hated that I was not able to make it there this year to the train and learn. Really, I had it on the calendar, was open to, and unfortunately, it ended up not being able to. Could y'all let me comment if Derek had a delay coming in, or if it's just something that I'm seeing? I'm gonna try to refresh you real quick. Hopefully, it doesn't mess things up. Kind of disappear and then come back in. Now, I'm seeing Derek coming in is a delay, so hopefully y'all aren't. I mean, kind of mess with things. We show stuff on video. If y'all haven't tuned into the live show for the past months, there have been all kind of new rules when it comes into having banana-shaped objects on live video. And so we don't get to show this kind of things tonight, but we will talk about the different pieces and parts of them. But yeah, it should be an interesting show. Derek, lots to talk about, man. It's ultimately, where do you think the best place to start is? Well, it's, to me, I don't know if anybody that tuned in was watching it, but there was a video that just recently was shared. And I don't know why, just the channel name just completely blanked mine. Yeah, Ben Stoker. So, Ben Stoker shared a video in which he took his high staccato, dropped it, barrel down in his garage to show that it was capable of going off when dropped in certain ways. And it really wasn't bringing anything to light that people were already aware of. But he was bringing things like that, hey guys, popular guns out there might not exactly be as safe as you believe they are. The type of gun that he ultimately was used, the type of design has kind of been familiar with many throughout the years, was Series 70 1911, in the sense that it is lacking a part that a lot of modern firearms have, but not all of them. And so to me, that would start a conversation back in the industry with that video. Like, wow, here's a super popular gun that just went off in somebody's garage. Now, he did it the safe way, right? He pulled the projectile out of the bullet, so it wasn't a primer that's being ignited, in there in the garage. But yeah, very high-end, popular firearm that went off. And it's not, that specific brand in a sense that it's that specific design or one of the many designs that's available, that exist out there. So I just figured a good conversation to have on Training Show. And of course, we invite all kinds of, we invite your comments and concerns, questions that you have throughout the show. We may have opportunities to address. You may point out something that, we're thinking of. But I'm going to ask the questions when I show is that, those are all of you that are tuning in. Do you believe that a firearm should have the feature of being completely drop safe, or as much as drop safe as we could, expect mechanically on a gun you carry for personal defense? And if you do believe that, drop in the comments. What is your favorite gun? What are you putting your trust in? Kind of like and I say trust. Right? I'm sure Derek is as well. As I'm sitting here, having a live show. I have a shaped object, and a holster in my pants that's currently pointed at body parts, right? And so there is a layer of trust that goes into that. That if I'm carrying a gun from day to day, I should have the expectation that I don't have to worry about the gun going off, when it's in that holster pointed at body parts, where ultimately I could get injured, or really anyone could get injured for that matter, making sure that I'm not a liability to others. Yeah. It's not so, and without really having to jump in and peel back too many layers in regards to like Series 70, Series 80, what does that mean? Well, we kind of talked about how modern guns, many of them are designed to be, drop safe. And so all that is that if you can imagine a block in front of the firing pin that, and I'm simplifying this, but right, but I finger that firing pin that prevents that firing pin from going forward, impacting the primer unless the trigger's pulled, right? So if you think about some of the modern striker-fired videos out there, like something from Glock or Smith & Wesson P, or Kendrick, right, that I have here in front of me, I'm hoping that the algorithms don't put the slide I'm holding here, but a lot of these guns, feature a part built in them, and many people are familiar with this, but I'm going to point it out just to get it or not. Yeah, so Deryck's pulling stuff apart while talking here, but in front, or excuse me, in the back of the slide here, I'm going to show you where this sits, where Deryck is pointing out in his hand. There is a firing pin block right there, touching there with the pencil, right? And so that blocks that firing pin from moving forward until the trigger's pressed. Now, as the trigger's pressed, Deryck, you have that trigger bar? So I'm still some delay. So I'm thinking you're holding up the trigger bar, but when the trigger is pressed, as that trigger bar comes back, that you see that bump on the trigger bar, it pushes up on that firing pin safety and allows the path for the firing pin to move forward. And many modern firearms are designed with that, including the Kendrick I have here, including the parts and pieces from the Glock that Deryck has. But not all guns have this. And so the Series 80 incorporated that feature in that 1911 design. And so ultimately, when they first started at 1911, back in 1910, all the way forward, I think it was into the 80s is when they came out with Series 80 gun, it did not have a firing pin block. And so those guns, under certain conditions prior to that, were capable of going off if dropped. What does that mean? Well, it ultimately means that the firing pin itself, when dropped, the inertia is driving forward and hitting the back of that primer. Under most circumstances, the inertia required to do that means that in that gun, that it barreled down. It's firing pin down. And so you can imagine, you had like a load in the back of a pickup truck or something, and you end up slamming the brakes, load in the back of the pickup truck. It's not properly, tied down, shifts forward and kind of hits the back of the truck, right? Everybody has seen that. You had something on the seat of your car, your coffee cup or your water drink or something like that, and you slam brake and everything flies forward off the seat. That's all that's happening with the gun, is that the brakes are being slammed on as it impacts the ground, and that firing pin is being driven forward with enough force to be able to crush that primer, causing the gun to go off. So and I can't show the video because it showed the banana-shaped objects that trigger the algorithms, but if you look at Ben Stoker's video, you'll notice he's driving it muzzle down, right? Which means if the gun goes off, hopefully, that is being impacted with the ground, but obviously, ricochets are a thing, right? So it could go somewhere, it could still cause injury. And so, that's what we're talking about in between the Series 70 that lacks that firing pin block and the Series 8 that has it. Well, if it's safer to have it, why don't all guns have it, Deryck? Why doesn't firearms like the Staccato and many others, that don't have that firing pin block? Yeah, absolutely. Less parts, it simplifies it. But if you feel the difference between triggers of Series 8, there's a noticeable difference. You have a better Series 8 gun. And so those that, especially in competition fire, that are trying to chase that, at least on a deviation with the gun, they're pressing the trigger, it's going to be easier to do that with a Series 7. You're going to have tighter groups, or at least in theory, you're going to be able to pull off tighter groups with a trigger. That's why you have to end up changing out their triggers and whatnot. And so, that's the reason, right? And so, is it important that we have something like that? And what are firearms that exist? Let's talk revolvers too. I think, Deryck, think about revolver. Go back like your childhood, and you had a 5-shot revolver. What didn't you do? That's exactly right. You go back to my childhood, and it's like I can't tell you how many people, And at that point, I didn't even know that I had a fully understanding of the different guns or the people who were providing this advice as well. But there were so many times that would have mentors throughout my childhood with guns. We'll talk about revolvers. Is you never keep a live round in the chamber that was sitting in line with the hammer. Because again, it could slam into the hammer like the gun dropping that could drive that firing pin into the back of the casing, causing it to go off. But along the way, the design, the revolvers were also evolved. Whereas before, you could not keep a live round in the chamber. If you could pick up a modern Smith and Wesson revolver, from the gun store, what you're going to find is it does have safety mechanisms that are built into it. You have two different, common types of safety mechanisms in a revolver now. One being a transfer bar and the other being a hammer block. And so, transfer bars basically means that with some designs, the hammer doesn't go forward enough to be able to impact the firing pin. And so the transfer bar bring up a sheet of metal or a metal, right, to be able to fill that gap. That way when the hammer falls forward, it hits that strip of metal that exists between the hammer and the firing pin, and that causes that to go to push forward. Or the firing pin block that's very similar in appearance, but works to prevent the hammer from being able to come far forward. So one fills the gap, basically creates a gap. I guess is an easy way to look at that. So if you pick up the modern firearms, there's with modern revolvers, there's not a need, to be able to not have that empty chamber in line with the hammer we used to have to, because the hammer now blocked from being able to impact, with that fire pin butt. I think let's take away the firing pin hammer for a second. Think about just the ones with that flat hammer. The different manufacturers use different designs. I think like some Wesson, uses a different design than Morris does, right? So it just kind of depends on what manufacturer is designing that revolver. They could either use that transfer bar or they could use that block. And so the ones that have the firing pin on the hammer can't use the transfer bar because firing would be hitting the metal. And so on those, you would have the firing pin block that would slide up that prevents that hammer or prevents that firing pin from being able to reach the primer. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there's still some revolvers that exist out there that may not be drop safe. And with any firearm that, that you're training with, that you're carrying it, you're just having fun at the gun range with, it's important that you understand how that firearm works, because you may need to be able to, do extra things to mitigate the additional risk that you may be exposed to at different types of arms. And so, having guns that aren't purely drop safe is probably more common than a lot of people think. And another very, very popular firearm that runs into that in long guns is a lot of them. It's not one particular design. You think about shotguns and AKs and AR-15s. They all, kind of, not should say all, but many, most, a lot. Of these different designs all incorporate a floating firing pin. That is able to bounce around. And some of y'all watching the show may have seen like an AR-15, right? You chamber around, maybe shoot down, and you end up taking that cartridge out of that rifle after, and all of a sudden you see that tiny little dimple on that on the primer. Right? It's like, whoa, why is there that tiny dimple there? That's because the firing pin is loose, on the inside of it and able to bounce back and forth. And so when you send that bolt forward, chambering that round, again, that whole system's coming forward. The brakes happen. When the brakes happen, the firing pin is still shifting forward a little bit, right? And so in theory, the firing pin could drive forward with enough force to impact the primer, causing the gun to go off. And so, Derek, your students ask about the little dimple in the primer. And it's, as you're Derek talked already, or, where a lot of policies that exist in law enforcement agencies that they do not keep chambered in the weapons, whether it's a shotgun or, something like a carbine or a rifle. Where the magazine is in, the AR bolt is forward, and if they end up needing a gun when they retrieve the staged firearm, that's when they go ahead and rack around into that chamber. And one of the reasons for that is the concern that some sort of inertia could cause the gun to go off when somebody was not intending for it to go off. And it's just recently, right? There was a police officer that had just finished serving a warrant, and I think this is Scottsdale, Arizona. But they just finished serving a warrant. I don't know the details of the incident. Hoping those get released or does a FOIA request on. I'd love to peel back later some. But the basic lines of the story is after they finish serving the warrant, they're putting away a bag with a rifle and it falls and impacts the ground, and the impact causes the gun to go off, and unfortunately, very unfortunately, ends up shooting, killing the detective. And so the early leaders obviously point at the fact that the AR with the floating firing pin could cause the gun to go off. And I always like in this kind of stuff, I want to peel back later. There's got to be so much more that details that we need to know to be able to understand how that happened. Was there interaction with the gun at all? While it was falling. Is the potential that somebody engaged the trigger while it's falling? Ultimately, was the safety one? Could it something in the bag, have caused the trigger to actuate, causing the gun to go off? Was the safety on when it was found? Was the bolt forward? There's so many different questions that we need to be able to have answers to understand, of what actually happened in that incident. But there's all kinds of things that's true. And I think that, it's, and I didn't serve military, right? And so I don't have that experience it's all with, but I sit back and think about how many people in the militaries around the world that are using some variant, of the guns that we're talking about, that are interacting with it on a daily basis, where it's falling off of vehicles, where it's falling out of hands, where all of this has happened. And, we don't have these documented cases of, all of this proof of these guns just not being drop safe. And so obviously one of the questions that I always want to know, when it comes to guns going off and falling, if we know that no one else had interaction with it, we know that nothing pressed the trigger, like if we can somehow figure that out, that those two things did not happen, then I want to know what has been, how the gun maintained, meaning have they changed parts out in it? Was it completely spec OEM, or have they started dropping aftermarket parts into it? And this is something that happens a lot with handguns, in the sense that some of these aftermarket, especially competition triggers, some of the aftermarket triggers disable some of the safety mechanisms, and make it not as it once was as designed, to be able to cut corners for better triggers. You're cutting out components. Yeah. Right, that's it. Somebody takes a drill and it starts honing down the trigger components in the sear. All of a sudden, that engagement is not where it should be, and that can cause the gun to go full load, or it can cause the gun to no longer be drop safe. And so those are modifications that come in. And so that's the stuff that I always want to know. And Eric's seen this many times. He instructors, see a lot of students have seen this so many times, where guns aren't working the way the manufacturer designed it, and the answer is because someone messed with it. They either modified it themselves, they changed parts on it. And maybe they turned the gun reliable, or maybe they turned the gun full auto, or double shots, whatever. And so that's always what I want to know is, okay, what has been changed about that? And so, when you think about like the ARs, the same thing applies as it does with like the Series, 70 and 80, in the sense that, or the Series 70, the 1911s, if we're dropping the rifle or handgun in a way that the firing pin is parallel with ground, right, it doesn't have that inertia to be able to push it forward. So generally speaking, if we're talking about just a free-floating firing pin having enough inertia to crush that primer, we're having to talk about that firing pin being oriented to where it's going towards the ground, where the ground stops and the firing pin does not. Right? And so can that happen? And many people have played with this and have tested this. And again, we're not talking about dropping guns from airplanes, helicopters, and having it go off. If you have a gun for chest height, should you have to worry about that AR going off? And I don't believe that from that height that you can generate enough force with that firing pin to be able to crush that primer. Because you have to remember, when you send a bolt forward, it generates a lot of force and drives that bolt forward. And again, stops, and that firing pin continues. And that's where the little devil comes from. And I just don't think that you can, under those types of circumstances, get that to where you could repeat it. Now, there's always exceptions, right? Let's say you haven't cleaned your rifle in the last 10 years and, it's all completely gummed up in there, and that firing pin is pushed forward, that bolt to where it's not just bouncing forward, but it is stuck forward and drives forward. I think that you could possibly cause that to go off. So that's obviously a concern. I've seen what I believe that to be true, with guns where somebody racks around and the bolt goes forward and then goes off. Yeah. I remember a video, I think a couple years ago, where someone from tactical response, they did their best to repeat certain circumstances. The only way they got the gun to go off on impact is I have a bolt sitting here, right? But imagine the charge coming back where the bolt carrier group from the full rear position. They had it hooked up to a lever, but they basically stuck the other in the vise and then pulled that bolt all the way back, in that rear position and slammed it with a hammer. And with that hammer force driving that bolt forward, that did end up being enough inertia, to be able to crush that primer. And I think they repeated it 2 or 3 times. Those were the only circumstances, but that was only been able to do that with the upper off of the load, with that bolt carrier pulled all the way in rear position and hit with a hammer. With the bolt all the way forward, they could not repeat that. So when the bolt was in the forward position, hit it with that same hammer even harder, they could not get it to repeat, that round go off. And so, some arguments, I guess, could be made if you had the rifle with magazine and the gun loaded, bolt locked to the rear, something releases it and generates additional force, then potentially generate an required to cause that gun to go off. But I don't believe that it's near of a concern as it sounds like in isolation. But again, think about that. If these guns weren't trusted to be drop safe under normal working conditions, then how could we safely do things like allow them, a gun range, allow them as a patrol rifle where you got officers running that could trip, or allow them in the military, where same conditions apply, right? Just so many outside variables. So we need to be able to have a certain amount of trust, with firearms that we work with. And, I think that we're always mitigating risk, right? There's always going to be risk associated with using guns, but I don't think that risk, as long as we're talking about, guns that are generally designed to be drop safe, that, that are in proper working conditions, that are properly maintained, that have not been modified in the wrong ways, have not had parts changed that could lessen or weaken those, the safeties on the guns, then, I don't worry about those pieces. But what are your thoughts on that? But I don't, it was a
Yeah, it was, and it has to be. Yeah, and I'll tell you the truth, like, and I think you're the same way. I would ask my students that were showing up with that model gun, "Has that gone back for the voluntary recall?" Because I was not allowing them on my range just for the mere fact of how they would that ND or that, that drop discharge go off is very similar to something that could potentially happen on our range with the
Yeah,
type of
it's
classes we run.
just for, to further explain that for those of y'all that haven't been through our courses, we explain to students at different times different things, right? That it would be like way better for you to let go of the gun and let it hit the ground, than it would for you to try to catch a fumbling gun or something like that, right? We look at the gun falling as that should be the safer of the two. That too many times you've had people reach out, try to catch things that have caused the firearm to actually discharge. And so we put a lot of emphasis, on the guns, being drop safe. And so if that was something that we could not trust with, certain manufacturers, then, those guns were, firearms that we were, not allowing, on the range, for that, because we, as instructors, we've got the responsibility, to make sure that we're doing things properly to mitigate the risk as, as best as we can to help ensure the safety, of the participants of that class. And, all of it is a risk and benefit thing. But, no one should go to a training class and leave there needing medical attention, right? Like that shouldn't happen, So we want to make sure that we're doing things properly to set that up for success.
And I don't want anybody to get me wrong. Like, I don't think that, if you carry a SIG, you're being reckless. Like that, like that's not it at all. If that was the case, we'd have a whole lot of people getting shot by them. I'm just bringing it up because it's one of the most well-known instances of a new model coming out. Um, I've had students say, "Well, why don't I just have a thumb safety, external manual safety on my gun?" And that's another whole can of worms we could open up of why you shouldn't need it. It shouldn't be part of the gun. It's a bunch of extra training you need to. But if your risk assessment of yourself and your life, and you decide you're carrying a gun with a thumb safety, go for it. Like my criteria is if I'm going to carry a modern striker fired gun, which is all I'll carry, I need to have a trigger block safety. So I don't know if anybody can see that, but you need that little. I want that little extra tab sitting on the end of that trigger, so that I know that that trigger is not getting pressed unless my finger is getting on top of it to deactivate it. So everybody's going to set their own criteria for what's acceptable risk and what they want in a handgun for themselves. And you're just going to make a choice. Like just like the Series 70 1911s. Like I'm not going to go out and stop everybody. Like I'm still allowing staccatos in my class now that I know it's a Series 7. I don't find it to be that easily repeatable that I think it's going to be that it would be a safety issue on one of my ranges.
Yeah. And,
What about
I think that with the orientation to be able to repeat it, does, put that muzzle in a downward position as well.
and also like we're not I mean even on an indoor range, but primarily you and I both are outdoor range guys. So the ground is usually not even like close to concrete hard. So, that's another factor that needed to be in place for that to actually happen.
Yeah, definitely so. Uh, and again, there many concrete ranges that exist out there and stuff as well. And it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, with even Sammy specifications before is what has to happen, to be able to repeat this, and not just with a Series 70, but with any other type of guns. Like I said, with the AR-15, the video I watched previously, was a couple of instructors from tactical response that were hitting it with a big old rubber mallet, where the bolt slamming forward. So are we going to see that in any normal use? And I don't think that you do, under normal circumstances, I don't think that that's something that we have to, to have that kind of concern with. So, Do I allow AR-15s in the class? Absolutely. Do I allow AKs? Absolutely. Do I allow shotguns? Absolutely. And we know that, we need to do things to properly mitigate risk. And some of that is handling, some of that is the way that we set the firearms up. Some of that is staying away, from certain types of modifications, with different guns that could take away some of that manufacturer's risk mitigation, and increase the risk, of something bad going on.
I mean, I've seen an AR dropped out of a helicopter on a fast rope exercise. I can't tell you how high. It was high. It was high enough that when it got picked back up, the barrel was bent and it did not go off. And I guarantee, and I can tell you for a fact that that gun was loaded. Now it was loaded with blanks, but a blank has a primer
Yeah.
and it's probably a softer primer. So it would have gone bang at least once if that gun wasn't drop safe. And I mean, high enough up that it actually bent the barrel. So, what happened was the guy started it off, went through, and his sling just wasn't like done right. And the sling just whoop, and the rifle just went, came off. It happens. Now with shotguns, like we sort of breezed over shotguns. Shotguns like have a different sear engagement action for the most part, and it hasn't changed actually. And a lot of people might be surprised that older shotguns, if they've been upkept with springs and stuff like that, are, from what I've seen and studied, are actually safer when it comes to dropping than the newer stuff. The newer stuff has like this sear, like here, let show you all that I should never have. I never went to art class. A sear on a shotgun, you have sort of like this little arm with a little spring on it, and then the hammer comes back, and it's got like this little cutout like this. So I don't know if, let's see if I can get. Is that visible?
Uh, yes. Yep.
Sorry. All right. So we got our little spring here. So as the hammer comes back, those little tabs actually hook onto that little sear right here. And that spring is what's keeping the pressure on the back of that hammer. So if this is the butt of the gun back here, if that goes like that and the spring is weak, or from it's excessive effort of like dropping it from like standing height, that spring could potentially compress and release the hammer. And that hammer then has all of its spring power to hit that floating uh, firing pin.
Yes.
Now, that's a Remington model. So the butt of the gun on a Remington is where the trouble comes in. If you grab a Mossberg, because they have the thumb tab on the backbone
Yep.
of the, it's the opposite. It's muzzle side. If it goes slamming muzzle first down, that will do the same sort of release, but a bit of a different mechanism. So that's why, excuse me, in those classes, and I haven't done a shotgun class in forever, but in those classes, at the end of each firing session, that was bolts were always like were open. So semi-automatics were locked open, or the pump was pumped open and left open because of the fact of that rifle, and because we go muzzle down, there's a potential for one of those rifles to potentially fall or something like that. So that's the only time that's the only gun I will actually ensure that the breech is open in between firing sessions. What about you?
Yeah, no, same.
You sort of the same way?
And it kind of the same as well when it comes to even staging them, right? Is
Yep.
that, with handguns, I think we've talked about this before, the importance of having the gun ready right now, like round chambered, ready to go. It's on your body. If you need it, you either have it ready or you don't have it ready. You don't have the time to go get it ready. Self-defense incidents happen extremely quickly. But when it comes to long guns, ultimately, if you have the time to go retrieve your gun, like it's a home defense situation, or like it's a patrol rifle, or even a civilian that's going to retrieve it from the backseat of their car to, to stop the active shooter because they're pinned down from, or whatever, right? If you have the time to go retrieve it, you kind of have the time to rack around into it. And so I think that, it makes sense to do more to mitigate the risk with that staged gun, by not having that round chambered in it, that could increase the risk on something like that, with the shotgun or even with the rifle for that matter.
Yeah.
But yes, anytime that those guns are, no longer being, in control, of that person in their hands, in that control of that person, it does make sense at that point to go ahead and make sure they're open.
I But like rifles, like my defensive AR rifles are sitting there round chambered safety on because the AR as well as the AK with the safety on, you cannot pull the trigger. And pulling of the trigger is what releases the hammer. Whereas on the shotgun, the safety
Right,
on prevents you from pulling the trigger. But as you saw from my little diagram,
right,
it can release itself. And in fact, a shotgun with the spring on the sear broken, you might not even know it's broken. Like because it will still work without that spring there. Or as that spring gets weakened, it'll still almost always work. It just you won't notice it until, if you do a butt slam with like a Remington or a muzzle stab at the ground with a Mossberg, you won't know it until you do something like that. Then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, I got a problem. I need something fixed. Um, but you know, hey,
definitely.
oh,
Um,
and then before we forget,
yep.
California and I think maybe Massachusetts have their own set of testing criteria that a gun has to pass before it gets put on their allowed list. I know California for sure, and I want to blame Massachusetts for the other one.
Yeah, I think that is the other, if I remember correctly, manufacturers have to send I think multiple variants of each model, each SKU number that, ultimately that they would want to sell inside of that state. And, those all have to pass that drop safe testing.
Yeah, but if you're buying a gun from one of the major manufacturers, I guarantee you it has been tested, and the manufacturer has to put out the money for it. And the manufacturers with liability law and everything else, the last thing they want to do is deal with lawsuits because they missed something in testing on their firearms. So you know But this is the reason when I tell people, then they show up and they're like, "Well, this gun's been in the family forever," and I'm always like one of this, like this is a Browning, the slide from a Browning high powered that is actually from World War II era, and like this one, I can actually stick my finger in here and push on the little back of the plunger, and I could feel the firing pin on the spring actually touching the back of my finger. So this is sort of like the close to a Series 70
Right. No, show
thinking
the interior side of that slide, where, and I'm going to show at the same time. Oop, if I can get that up there, on this one from the Canic, right? So we see this firing pin safety here, where the firing pin, excuse me, where the trigger bar, pushes into to be able to engage it, that allows that firing pin to then move forward. So you can see that it's lacking on that high power design, but it is here on this one. And so that's kind of what we keep referring to, with those firing pin safeties.
yeah. But
Ultimately,
this is
like Derek said, if you're buying modern guns or at least a modern design, you should expect, to have those kind of features that are built into them. One of the questions that we got that I saw was, what everyday carry guns are known to be drop safe that kind of meet, and have these types of features, that we are talking about. And one, would be like the example that I have here, from Canic, with this one, the Meta MCI. It has, all of those features built into it. So Derek, separately, you can show the trigger shoe. Nope. Yep.
trigger shoe. Yeah,
So this one is from a Glock, but on the face of that trigger, you see that little additional tab that is sticking out, right? That's spring actuated. I've seen those before, but that trigger cannot go backwards unless something is depressing that tab. No, when I say something, it doesn't know the difference between, marker and a backpack, versus your finger for that matter. That's why we have holsters, but once that tab is pressed in, the trigger can then clear the spacing of the frame, allowing that to go back. Well, then additionally, you've got those firing pin safeties, and of course you have the disconnect internally with the trigger itself, and so you've got all three of those that are working together that will help make the gun not drop safe. So like this design, the design from Canic, certainly that meets that category. Glock came out with their safe action pistol design in the 80s. That meets that category. The Smith and Wesson M&P series, Rob's Avidity Arms, PD10. The SIG P320 or the 365 series doesn't have that tab safety on the face of that trigger. Some people are okay with that. Some people prefer, to have the trigger mechanism that has that built into it as an extra layer of protection, preventing inertia from causing the trigger to go back. All right, so
But
those are some pretty solid examples that exist out there, Derek.
yeah, the SIG has its drop safety now is I don't know if they changed it on the recall. I know the recall from what I've seen was a different what I believe to be a lighter trigger shoe that made it not able to get enough inertia of a drop for the drop to actually make all that happen. But their drop safety is sort of like a little hook, and their guns sit in a full cocked position, right? That's the other thing about modern striker fired guns. Different manufacturers have their slide and striker configuration sitting in a different condition when the gun is loaded. So like a Glock, when it's loaded, it's in a half cocked position. So that spring that you all saw when I pulled out the striker earlier is not in a fully compressed position. You pulling the trigger completes the compression for the gun to fire. Whereas like some models like Springfield Armory, the XDs, if I remember right, they sit in a full cocked position, and when you pull the trigger, that releases it and undoes all the spring pressure, like a 320 does the same, correct?
Yes, I think the SIG. I don't know if it is fully cocked or it's like 95%,
Yeah,
90%, but it's certainly way more than the Glock being at half tension.
yeah.
And it may be that it's under full tension, that all it is doing is just releasing that striker, and driving it forward.
And
Uh,
I mean, the reason they do it, a lot of them do it is like if you'll fire a gun that's in a partial cock position to start, and those that are in full cock position, usually the ones that are in the full compressed position has a what feels to be a smoother trigger press because all you're doing is pulling the sear down and away to release the striker. Whereas the Glock and then like the Avidity arms, you are applying that last 3 pounds, 4 pounds, 5 pounds, whatever poundage of spring tension before it drops and lets it go. So some people are like, oh, I like the smoother or the crisper trigger release of model X from this manufacturer.
right.
And
That's one of the reasons the triggers will feel very different, across